to get to these elections in the areas in KZN. So that's something we do need to look at. We're going to be bringing in our political analyst, Aubrey Matshiqi, in a short while, and he'll be able to give us a little bit more when it comes to that. So one of the things that we heard from the SANDF that were talking to us here on the SABC, Brigadier General Mafia Mgobozi, basically saying that one of the things that the soldiers are going to do is guard the voting material storage at IEC centres around the country. That's what they're wanting to do, and also help with the transportation of materials particularly in those inaccessible areas, because that is very, very difficult to get to, and they're able to help. They're also on standby for any other eventuality. So that's the role of the SANDF in these elections, and certainly will be there for these hotspots where they are going to be keeping some calm. Well, let's just give you another update on the COVID numbers, because certainly COVID is playing a very big part in these elections. And the last thing that anybody wants this to be is a super spreader event. And that's what the officials are ensuring, that everything is sanitized, that you are keeping the social distancing, wearing a mask. Well, just to update you on the latest numbers that came in overnight, 230 new cases of COVID-19 have been registered across the country in the latest 24-hour reporting period. The National Institute for Communicable Diseases has also reported 14 new COVID-19 related deaths, and that takes the national death toll since the start of the pandemic to 89,177. So active cases in South Africa currently now standing at 18,675. So that's just an update on the COVID stats, which obviously are very important at this time as we move into the elections. I mean, you do remember that there was the threat that the elections wouldn't actually go ahead due to the pandemic, and that there were court cases and reports that were out and about saying that we needed to move these elections. But it was decided instead that they will happen now. And we were actually having that conversation yesterday, actually, with political editor Zwandile Mbeche, and saying, you know, we're actually very glad that they did go off now, because you never know what would be in February and what the situation would be like. The numbers are pretty low right now, even though the IEC have had half the amount of time to prepare for this. Usually 80-something days. Now they've only had 42 days. So it has been a big rush, but we're here. And now it's just to ensure that everything goes off smoothly. So, yeah, there we go. Keep it safe.
And incidentally, there are about 1,000 or so vaccination sites also open today that would be close to these voting stations.
Wonderful.
So if you want to go and vaccinate, you're able to
vote
do that.
And vaccinate at the same time.
One-stop shop.
Be the ideal citizen in South Africa. Go and do that. That'd be wonderful.
Well, we've got Aubrey Matshiqi back with us, Gogo. So as we've been crisscrossing the country, the voting stations have now opened. Some people have cast their ballots already. Let's talk about some of the protest action that we've been seeing, because we saw there in Mbizana already people showing their discontent and their disgruntlement instead of going to the voting station to vote.
Well, that doesn't come as a surprise, because we did have some protests in the lead up to the election itself. So, as I said earlier, not voting is a democratic option. Another democratic option is to protest peacefully, even if you do so outside a voting station. What was interesting about Mbizana for me is that you have an ANC supporter wearing an ANC cap, declaring to the nation her disappointment with the ANC. But if you look at areas like Mbizana, they represent the problem of social inequality in South Africa. Social inequality in South Africa, amongst other things, happens in the form of inequality between rural and urban areas. And to the extent that the local state has been failing, local government has been failing to deliver on the interests of so-called ordinary citizens, it has failed even more when it comes to citizens who are in rural areas.
Why is that, though? You know, because if we listen to what the lady was saying there, she's basically saying, well, across the road, it's not as bad. The whole demarcation issue then also comes into it. Why would a council behave that way? Why would the governing party in that particular area, in that municipality, actually allow that to happen?
Well, that is a variation on a theme that has been with us for a long time. For instance, if you go to parts of KwaZulu-Natal, at a time when, let's say, the Inkatha Freedom Party was in charge, and the twist between the IFP and the ANC was heightened, you would go to areas like Ngutu, where in parts where the ANC has significant support, a road would not be tarred, as an example. But in parts where the IFP has significant support, that road would be tarred. In fact, the opposite was also true in some parts of the country, that in parts where the ANC is not significantly supported, that would be reflected in patterns of delivery. So you deal, in the case of Imbizana, you have a street, a road, that represents that kind of inequality, representing also the nature of internal politics within that village. And the nature of internal politics may even affect the flow of resources across the street, determining which side of the street gets more resources than the other.
And then, of course, if you look at things like going ahead, we hear a lot of talk about coalitions and what that would mean, whether we would see more coalitions. Of course, not long to go now before we get a full picture of what's to happen. But even before we get to that point, Aubrey, and this has been my consternation, just looking at various municipalities across the country in a little more in-depth way in some of the SABC's election programming leading up to today, you would find that, you have parties, not just the ruling parties, but the opposition as well, who are clearly at odds, not for significantly or overtly ideological reasons, but for the sake of it, it would seem, and thereby failing to deliver to the citizens, to the electorate in all of these municipalities. What's that about? Is this where people should be coming together in order to ensure that people actually do get services?
Well, if you look at the 8 metros and you look at the polling, internal polling that has been done by the ANC, the Democratic Alliance, and the Economic Freedom Fighters, you will see that they do very good polling. So they already know more or less whether there's going to be a need for coalition arrangements or not. But when it comes to the smaller municipalities, where coalition arrangements may become a necessity, and these are areas we don't focus on, the smaller parties and independents may become the kingmakers. So what we lack is effective pre-election pacting, and post-elections, what we lack is effective coalition arrangements. So these coalition arrangements, if you look at the period after the 2016 local government elections, have delivered instability. In other countries, what you see is legislation that regulates coalition, so that when parties have to go into a coalition arrangement, the period during which, for instance, the pacting should happen is stipulated by law, and some of the structural issues are stipulated by law.
So incidentally, SALGA indicated that they have such a document, so hopefully we'll have a look at it before all of these pacts are made. But Leah?
Yeah, I mean, this is the theme of these elections. I mean, going forward, I imagine that this is how it's going to happen in South Africa, are these coalition governments. And I mean, that's one of the talking points, is exactly what you are saying, is that you actually need to regulate these coalition governments, because we've just seen so many of them fall apart, and to the detriment of the voter, because you vote for one, they come together, that falls apart, then you get one in that, it's almost a bit of a mess here, isn't it?
Well, they fall apart for the wrong reasons. They don't fall apart because there's a twist between political parties about how to make the lives of citizens better. The twist is generally about narrow political interests. As I said earlier, the day before and the day after a local government election should look exactly the same. The fact that administratively they don't shows how pernicious an effect these ructions between political parties have become.
So, I mean, you've got so many different political parties that are coming in and already drawing a line in the sand and saying, I will not work with this party. There's no way I'll go into a coalition with that party. But that's what they say now. But when the push comes to shove and then they start tasting power and saying, okay, well, if we go with this person, then we will get power. And perhaps those are the wrong reasons that we're looking at, is that they, in fact, want power, not to fight for their voters, but to have the power. So who do you think is going to be the power maker in these elections? Because there are a couple of smaller parties that are really making inroads, but who do you see as the change makers?
Well, if you look at a metro such as Nelson Mandela Bay, for instance, the UDM, which has become reduced to a municipal party, actually, not even a provincial player or a national player, may become a kingmaker. Parties such as the Patriotic Alliance, in certain contexts, may become major kingmakers. And the thing about smaller parties and coalition making is that they can punch way above their weight, simply because without them, the coalition arrangement cannot happen. And once it has happened, may not even stand. So there's an extent to which the bigger parties have to nurse the smaller parties. But when you go to small areas like Bushbuck Ridge, for instance, in Mpumalanga, we should look at the tiny parties and how they are going to do. Because we have seen in very small towns, in very small areas, parties that are not known to us making a difference when it comes to coalition pacting.